So we're in our last little section of notes for animal STERNGRR, and we're still talking about how do animals perform these 8 functions that all living things perform. So we'll be on page 111 through 112 today. And first of all, reproduction and growth and development are processes that are tied in multicellular organisms. So previously we talked about 3 functions: excretion, nutrition, and respiration that were related in animals. They are connected together, they're tied to each other. And here we have reproduction and growth and development that are tied together as well in these multicellular animals. So all animals are going to reproduce sexually during their lives. At one point or another, they can reproduce sexually. Some animals can reproduce asexually, but for the most part, they're going to reproduce sexually. So they must use meiosis to make sperm and egg, which then must combine during fertilization. We've talked about that before. Sperm from the male, egg from the female, and it joins together. Some organisms, like earthworms, are hermaphrodites, and that just means that they make sperm and egg on the same body. But they must still exchange gametes with another organism. Still have to go through sexual reproduction. There are aquatic animals, organisms, that actually use external fertilization. And this allows them to release the gametes even without finding a particular mate. So this is really different. A lot of times land animals will physically mate. Okay? This is considered internal fertilization. The sperm is entering the body cavity of the female, and that's how fertilization occurs. But with aquatic organisms, if you think about Nemo and his parents, how was Nemo created? Well, his mom came, she found what she thought was a safe place. She laid her hundreds and hundreds of eggs. Then the dad came, Marlin came and actually released his sperm. And so the sperm and egg joined together, but outside of the body. And one of the reasons that that can happen is because they live in a water or aquatic environment. If it was just a dry, terrestrial, or a land environment, they wouldn't be able to do that. So land organisms are going to use internal fertilization, unlike our aquatic organisms. Okay, frogs do external fertilization as well. But for land organisms, because they require internal fertilization, this means they have to find a mate first. One good thing, though, about one adaptation that's beneficial here for the land organisms is that because of this internal fertilization, the female usually will also protect her eggs and will keep them safer. So the embryo is going to change into an organism during growth and development. Some organisms, like fish and insects, produce many offspring in hopes that some will survive to maturity, because not all of them will. Think about how many eggs were there when Nemo was there. Okay, there's hundreds of them, but only one survived. Many land organisms provide protection for the embryo. Some, like reptiles and birds, lay eggs that they will kind of stay and protect. And others will protect the embryo internally in the placenta, like mammals. So, like humans, we have the baby inside of our uterus, inside of the womb, and we'll keep it safe and protected until it's ready to be born. On the other hand, you have your reptiles and birds that will stay and be very protected. If you've ever been walking outside by a tree and a bird kind of swooped down at you, think about the geese. They do this as well. If they're swooping at you or honking at you, they're trying to protect their eggs. So as an organism grows, their bodies begin to experience changes. Organisms like insects and amphibians will go through a whole body change, and that's called metamorphosis. which is an adaptation that allows them to live in different habitats. Other organisms develop internally and only develop to prepare for sexual reproduction. So in this first part, organisms that go through a whole body change, thinking about your caterpillar growing, eating a whole bunch, developing into a pupa, having that cocoon, and then becoming an adult butterfly. First it lives on the trees or even in the dirt, and then it's able to take flight, living in different habitats. On the other hand, with organisms that develop internally, like humans, like puppies, they're only going to develop to prepare for sexual reproduction. So with humans, you're going to start to produce viable sperm, viable egg. Same thing with other animals, other dogs, elephants, cats. They'll all grow bigger, but physically they're not going to change that much. And on to the last STERNGRR function, we are at regulation. And regulation of the mature body is achieved through synthesis or use of hormones to send signals to other cells in order to maintain homeostasis. Well, that didn't work very well. Okay, in order to maintain homeostasis. Now, animals are going to use protein synthesis to make specifically shaped hormones. Hormones are just a special type of protein to respond to changes in the environment and internal bodies. So here you can think about some animals that live outside that grow more fur during the winter. Our external signal is that it's getting colder, and then internally we're going to send signals to produce more fur so we can stay warm. Many animals are also able to use sensory organs to perceive changes in their environment. So think about birds when they fly south for winter. How do they figure that out? Even some fish will swim to different areas. Salmon going back upstream to lay their eggs and to mate. The senses then use nerve cells to send chemical or electrical signals to the brain, which is regulatory center of the animal. So here, another form, here you have synthesis and regulation working together to control body changes, or to prevent body changes. Here in this picture, you actually have a picture of a nerve cell. It's also known as a neuron. And they're just showing you that here are signals that are being sent. Here you felt something on your arm. Maybe you touched something hot. There's a receptor on your skin. When you touch something hot, you're going to get a signal all the way back to your brain, and your brain will send a signal all the way back to the muscle in your arm and hand to tell you to move your hand. And all of that is going to happen within seconds. Okay. And here's our last bit of notes for this unit. The brain can then control movement patterns, moving away from a bad smell or towards a good smell, and can control internal responses. One thing that your body can do is if you're in danger and you kind of feel your heart pumping, why is your heart pumping? Well, it's actually trying to move or change, or even sometimes raise your blood sugar for your fight or flight response. And we'll actually talk about that response a lot more later on in our next unit. But for today, that's going to be all for this unit. If you'll take your time to fill in those 2 summary boxes that we passed over, 1 sentence for each, just summarizing this section. So make sure you spend 2-3 minutes summarizing in those 2 summary boxes, okay? And that's all for this unit on animal STERNGRR.